What's going on, y'all? Good morning. This is Bud Elliott of the Nolecast, and this is your preview for the Clemson at Florida State game. Another night game in Tallahassee. Clemson rolls in as just over a 2-touchdown favorite, over under of 47. Clemson, obviously, one loss on the season. They've been absolutely rolling, having killed App State, NC State, and then Stanford last weekend. Florida State comes in not rolling, but reeling, unfortunately, as they are now 1-4 on the season. A lot of changes coming for the Noles, probably in this game, but certainly overall for the program as well. At least that is my expectation. So let's go ahead and get into this. First, I want to tell you about our first sponsor, Legendary Team. Chad does an awesome job with your home loan. He's done two for me. 844-FSU-LOAN. 844-FSU-LOAN is the number to call if you want to get hooked up with an awesome home loan experience. I mean, more than 500 Nolecast listeners have already done so. I think we're going to close in on 600. Like, that's just freaking awesome, to be honest. So Chad does an awesome job, and he will get you hooked up with the best possible home loan experience. Knowledge of the industry, experience, customer service, and man, if you want somebody who's just bummed out about the Noles as you are, Chad is the guy to hit up. Let's talk Clemson's offense. This is an interesting unit. It has shown some improvement so far this year in the second year under offensive coordinator Garrett Riley. Garrett Riley came over from TCU. Last year, this offense looked, pretty poor. Personnel matters. And Clemson last year had a good number of injuries at the receiver position and also a couple on the offensive line. And it was the first year under a new system, and they struggled some. This year, they have looked legitimately better. I do have some things to point out that are positive about them. And I have a few lingering questions about this Clemson offense as well. So first, what does Clemson do well? They have a really, really good back in Phil Maffa. I think he runs hard. In some ways, I think he's a pretty good upgrade over Shipley, the running back who they had last year. They also are legitimately better at receiver this year than they were last year. A lot of that is just because they are now healthy or healthier. Antonio Williams has played pretty well for Clemson. Bryant Wesco, a true freshman who they got, is balling out for them as well. And I think the offensive line has taken a step forward, particularly at the tackle positions. I think they're legitimately, better there. Guard is an interesting one for them, and center Marcus Tate has graded out pretty well, but center and their other guard spot, they may be a little more vulnerable there. I don't know, depending on kind of what your perspective is. It is hard for me to ballpark just what this Clemson offense is, because against Georgia, I mean, they were just inept. Georgia was not afraid of what they had on the outside. They didn't play the freshmen much in that game, which probably did have an impact because the freshmen have some different level abilities than the veterans do on the outside. And even though Georgia was missing a good number of guys on defense, they did have Michael Williams healthy for the first half of that game, and he wrecked them, pretty good from that defensive end position. So then they go and they play App State, and it looks like all the problems are solved, and maybe they are. And they put up a 70 spot or something like that, maybe mid 60s, 66 on Appalachian State, and I was like, oh my God. But then the next week, South Alabama went into App State, Boone, North Carolina, and they put up a 50 burger, including like 40 something in the first half. And I was like, oh shoot, maybe Clemson's offense really is fixed, but maybe that had a lot to do with the defense of Appalachian State and how poor that defense is. So I kind of wanted to see a little bit more. And then they went and they played NC State, and NC State traditionally is a pretty good team. This year, their defense has taken a notable step back, though. They're not nearly as good as they have been in prior years. And Clemson came out on fire and just dusted these guys. And Clemson looks like it's not going to beat itself a whole lot on offense right now. You have to go beat it. I think you have to give Clemson credit for sort of gathering a better understanding of what they are and playing to those strengths. And to me, they're clearly doing that at this point in the season. But I'm also like, damn, is this NC State defense kind of bad? And last week, NC State scored on defense twice, but they also allowed NIU to move the football on them on some sustained drives. They allowed Louisiana Tech to move the football on them with a backup quarterback, by the way, in that game. And then they also got dusted by Tennessee, and even Western Carolina moved the ball on NC State some. So you could very well argue that NC State so far this year has zero good games, whereas the Noles have what, like half of a good game basically against Cal, and maybe part of a good game against Georgia Tech. Anyway, uh, and then last week they played Stanford, and Stanford is not a good defensive football team at all. And Clemson scored, what did they score? 40. It was 40-14. Stanford actually gave them a little bit of problems, and more than I thought they would. So I don't know if that was just a very kind of bland effort from Clemson. Most teams do not have their fastball every week. That's just not a thing that really happens in college football, at least not very much. And Clemson looked a little bit off last week, but also just maybe they were preparing for this big road game. I know FSU is 1-4, but FSU is pretty clearly a better team than like a Stanford level team. Even though people don't want to hear that, like you just haven't played serious cupcakes so far for the most part. So if you don't play very well in those games in which you're, a little bit of a coin flip, you have a chance to get blown out, like the SMU game. Anyway, so at this point, I think it is fair to conclude that Kate Klubnik will put up points on a defense that is not at least good. If the defense is great, I think that this offense might have a bit of a ceiling it hits just based on some personnel and things. But we don't really know how it will play against a defense that is like good to potentially very good. It's also totally fair to say that we don't truly know how this FSU defense will play in this game. And I think that's an important thing. If I'm Clemson, I want to try to see what FSU does. Last week, movement on the defensive line, it gave Clemson some fits up front. I was a little bit surprised by this. Now, Florida State, early in the season, they moved a decent bit. Later, they have not been doing so. And I think the results have been better when they don't do it and they just allow their guys to rush. So it's an interesting question here for this defensive staff of this Florida State football team. Are they going to move around a lot on the front, knowing that's what bothers Clemson, but maybe they're not really good at doing that? Or do you just let your guys play straight up? Clemson is a team that is going to want to run tempo. I think that is really smart, by the way, against FSU, because some of these FSU defensive linemen are pretty big. And I think they're going to wear down if you tempo them. So if I'm Clemson, I'm coming out, I'm going to go tempo early and often here. And that's not like a commentary that these guys are out of shape. It's just the sort of the body types that you have. And I want to get into that FSU defensive line depth because I don't think it's quite as good as it was in years past. They're going to want to run counter a lot. I think they're going to want to probably run Maffa a whole lot. And then they're going to want to throw screens and take their shot plays. For the Noles, one of the most important things here is going to be playing the screens like you did against Cal. If you get a good crowd for this game, I think maybe you can feed off that energy and maybe do something here against this Clemson offense. Maybe, but Clemson also has a legitimate tight end in Jake Brenningstool. Klubnik this year has been much more of a run threat, so you do kind of have to account for the legs in the 11-man run game. And he seems to be playing with some confidence. I'm not saying he's playing amazing, but you got to fight through these screens. You got to be physical on those. You got to communicate well in terms of some of the shot plays to make sure you just don't have guys running WTFO in the secondary. And you also have to count for Klubnik in the quarterback run game. Does that sound like something this Florida State defense is prepared to do? No, to me, not really. Now, could they do it in the first half? Possibly. Yeah. Like I actually think if you get I could see Florida State's defense balling out here like for a half and keeping this thing potentially close for a half. Honestly, I thought they did that against SMU pretty effectively in the first half. And then things started to kind of go downhill. So the defense, because the offense wasn't scoring at all, started taking more chances. I don't think there was like called chances, just guys maybe not being quite so assignment sound. They're playing a little more hero ball. That's just something we see across the sport, right? Offense isn't scoring. If you went to school when I did, and like Mickey Andrews was the DC there, but it wasn't really prime Mickey Andrews, who was, one of the best DCs in the history of the sport. In the later aughts, right, and mid aughts, you would see FSU's defense play really hard and really well for quite a long time in the game. And then like a Virginia in a 13-10 game would sneak out the tight end out the back on like a little tight end leak play for like a 40-yarder. And it was just they knew at a certain point one of the backers or somebody was going to freelance to try to make a play, to make something happen, because they knew the offense with Chris Ricks or Drew Weatherford or whomever just wasn't going to get it done. And they were right. Like, they knew that the offense was not going to score, most likely. But the defense needed them to keep playing their assignment. And the opposing offense knew that they probably eventually would not. So if you're the Noles, and if you get a good first half effort on defense, and I'm not really sure that you will, maybe you will, maybe you won't. There's certainly a chance that this Noles defensive line can come out and stalemate Clemson's offensive line for a little bit, possibly. Can you get a 60-minute effort out of them for that? Can you get them to play assignment ball the whole time if the offense isn't giving them any real hope? And that's a hard one for me to know. I don't really know if you can. And that's going to be largely the key to the game. Because if the Noles win this game, I cannot see them winning a game that is played with combined points between both teams in the 50s or in the 60s or probably even in like the high 40s. I think if the Noles are going to win this game, it has to be like an ugly game. If the Noles win this game, it's probably going to be like the headlines will be Florida State has an impassioned effort. This Clemson offense wasn't as real as it looked against App State, NC State, and Stanford. What happened, right? 30 combined points, 35 combined points, 28 combined points, maybe less. That is largely, I think, what needs to happen if FSU is going to win this game, because I don't really think that the Noles can win in a shootout. So you're going to need a home run effort from the defense, both in terms of effort intensity, but also mental intensity on the assignments, so that you force Clemson to drive. Last week, if you looked it up, Clemson had a bunch of really short fields against Stanford. And look, you're not going to give those back. If the defense forces turnovers for you, it's nice. Go take those and go score. But they have not really been forced to drive a lot this year. Clemson, there are some of the advanced metrics that are not totally buying into this offense yet. And again, max confidence Clemson can go out there and score, I think, on average, above average defenses, especially against bad defenses. They can take advantage of those quite a lot. But if they face a team that has good athletes on defense and is playing hard, we really haven't seen that. And some of the metrics out there are a little skeptical of a team that just put up 66 and 40 and whatever they put on NC State, probably 50 something, I would think. Yeah, 59. It's kind of crazy that SP Plus has an offense that has just scored 40, 59, and 66. Still has them like 17th in the country in offense. And that's kind of wild to me. Part of it's probably because the Georgia game carries a lot of weight still, and there are still some priors being worked out of the system of these advanced metrics. But there's some stuff here. It's like, okay, some of the success rate stuff, some of the passing down stuff. Okay, you can sort of start to see it. I'm sure that in their meeting rooms, FSU's coaches are like, there's something there to exploit. Now, does that mean they will be able to take that from the meeting room to the practice field, from the practice field to the game field, from the first quarter to the second to the third to the fourth? I don't know. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I don't really know what this team is going to act like on Saturday night. They could easily get blown out. At the same time, this is one of the few games of the year where Clemson will see a team that has some real athletes. And recently, some of those games have not gone super well for the Tigers. All right, now let's talk about this Clemson defense and this Florida State offense, which is probably the less sexy side of this matchup, but no less important than the side we just talked about. Clemson's defense comes in this year looking a good bit worse than it was last year. Now, is it actually? I don't know. I have some doubts about that in some areas, but in other areas, it certainly does look worse. This part is brought to you, of course, by Congruity, our friend Matt Lewis, congruityhr.com/Knowles. That's congruityhr.com/Knowles. You can also just click the link right there if you need payroll, if you need HR, whatever you need for your business, let's optimize your business. Hey, things are not really optimized this year during the football season. Your business does not have to be like this Florida State football season. Your business can be optimized with Congruity, congruityhr.com/Knowles. This Clemson defense comes in ranked 28th in the country in SP plus. Um, I don't think, like, if I had to bet my house on it, I really don't think that I would say, yeah, this is a defense that 27 defenses in the nation are better than. Personally, I don't. But there are some issues here. One of them is that despite the fact that Clemson only has one loss on the season, some of the criticisms of the Tigers with the lack of use of the transfer portal are valid still. Like, though FSU's 1-4 record does not invalidate those criticisms of Clemson, just as FSU's 13-0 record last year did not invalidate the criticisms of FSU's poor high school recruiting and lack of effort and the way Mike Norvell constructed the coaching staff in terms of lack of sales skills and relationship building on the coaching staff. Both criticisms can be true. And this year, you are seeing problems for both teams. Now, one has a lot more wins than the other, certainly. And if the goal is to win 10 games in the ACC, then what both these teams are doing is largely fine. Now, Clemson is probably a little more consistent method, I think, in theory. But FSU's also could be really consistent in theory. Just we don't have time to really do that on today's show. But one of the things you're seeing is that Clemson does not have really good depth along the defensive line this year on the exterior. I think they have a bit of an issue at edge. And one of those issues is that Peter Woods, who is in the very short list for the best defensive lineman in the ACC, he has been hurt and he's been missing the past couple games. He's a real impact player for them. And he's somebody who I don't think that Byers or Darius Washington can really handle very well if he is healthy and in the game. I don't know what his status is going to be for this one. But Clemson has had to play more guys on the defensive line at edge than I think they probably desired to in a season. I mean, it's interesting to note that Clemson, they already had to move Peter Woods to the outside, I think because of lack of depth, but they also have some pretty good depth on the inside. So I get moving him to the outside, but he's more of a bigger bodied defensive end. Instead, they're having to play like Jaheim Lawson and Cade Denoff more snaps than I think they want to. On the other side, TJ Parker is legitimately a very nice DN. So if he plays and Woods play, I have a hard time seeing FSU move the ball because I would expect the offensive line can't hold up against a really good defensive line like that based on what we've seen so far this year. And that's, Byers has not made the leap that you wanted him to. And Washington, I mean, it's cost himself a lot of money, I think, with the way he's played so far this year. I never bought into like the first round hype of him, but I will say like he had a draftable grade from the scouts preseason. So disappointing to see how he's played so far. If Woods doesn't play though, some of these other Clemson DNs, like I just mentioned, Lawson and Denoff, they're not necessarily hits at this stage in their career. I'm not saying they're busts, but they're not guys who have been dominating for the Tigers. And there are other spots where you're starting to see it's like, damn, they're relying on some youth here. The youth is not particularly playing all that well. Sammy Brown, true freshman, freak of an athlete, but he's had some real up and down games. Woodaz, the linebacker as well, has been someone who's on the field for them all the time. But we are seeing a drop off from this Clemson linebacking core compared to what it was last year when they had Trotter, who is now in the NFL. I don't think Clemson's hit rate recruiting high school, even though I think it will remain high. I don't know that it can remain like crazy high in perpetuity, even though they do like they scan for character really well, like they do all those kind of things. We're starting to see a little bit of that, I think. And then they've been pretty vulnerable at safety as well. Like Barnes and Griffin have not been great at them for safety. They had a lot of issues at corner early in the season with some of the injury stuff. The corners have held up better than I expected them to. And some of these things you're seeing from Clemson's defense, I'm going to be honest about it. I kind of think because Clemson has gotten out to such big leads in these past couple games, they've rotated in a lot of the young guys, and those guys have gotten to play a lot more snaps than I think you'll see Clemson's defense play with on Saturday night in Tallahassee. So what I'm saying is I think Clemson's defense is better than the numbers have shown, and I'm not entirely sure that Clemson's offense is quite as good as some of the numbers have shown. So how do you attack this? It's going to be Brock Glenn for FSU at quarterback. DJU, it's announced is going to be out for a while with the finger injury. So got a finger issue there. I, I worry like you'd have like a not a mutiny, but just a real buy-in issue if you continue to roll DJU out there, even if Glenn has not been that much better in practice. I don't think you can run the the full complement of the offense with Glenn necessarily, but I don't know that is truly a problem because right now the offense looks like the worst health department rated cheesecake factory in the world. Okay. There's a lot of different stuff and none of it really works. I think this week you should see a simplified game plan a little bit with Brock Glenn. So whatever he's comfortable doing, probably running him more. I mean, that would just make sense to me because he's a lot more athletic than DJU is. And if I'm Mike Norvell, and he has done a good job of this over his career, I'm not somebody who's going to judge Mike Norvell just on one season. Like I think that's largely stupid. You know, I did that actually uh, about 6 years ago, and I learned my lesson in a hard way. I thought Jim Harbaugh was basically cooked, and you know what? He wasn't. He actually turned it around pretty nicely. More on that on the Monday show. I've been doing a lot of research because people have asked me on our Patreon, patreon.com/Nolecast, uh, like how can this be turned around? Are there any examples of a coach who has had a good career, having a really bad season, and then turning it around at a school? And I actually found a couple. So we'll go over those. We'll kind of compare and contrast the dynamics of this Knowles team and this Knowles program to some of those. All right. So let's get into this a little more. Brock Glenn, I think probably a little more limited as a passer in theory than DJ is. I don't know. Like, man, I wonder if Glenn throws a more catchable ball than DJ does. Like, I am just concerned about some of these drops, and I'm like, man, can it really be all the receivers and all the tight ends just having drop issues, or does the ball DJ throws is it inherently less catchable? But if so, like, why is it not as consistently bad in practice as it is in games? Things that make you go, I don't know. Offensive line, obviously, Richie Leonard is announced as out for the year. I do think that's a real injury, by the way. I know in this day and age, people speculate anytime a guy is out around the 4-game mark, like, oh, is it a real injury? I actually do think he was hurt for real. So I don't think that they're faking this. People have asked me about that. I'm giving you my opinion. If I'm wrong, I'll be wrong. I'm not saying I'm guaranteeing this, but from what I have heard, I do think that's a real injury. And if you guys ask me stuff, I try to be as honest as I possibly can. I think it is imperative for the Noles to start fast in this game. You have a very low probability of winning. I mean, you're probably in like the 10 to 15% range. One of the ways you can really win this is getting the crowd big into it. I know it's like 55,000 capacity right now because you got stadium construction going on, but there's still a certain energy to it. You still kind of feel it, especially when you don't have that dumbass DJ that they had running. Not DJU, but talk about like literally the DJ in the stadium. Now that he's gone, um, you have a different vibe in the stadium. If you want to see a crowd quit, get down real early. If you want to see the crowd get into it, I know this is like emotional hocus pocus BS to a lot of you guys who like the analytics, and clearly I like the analytics too. But I do think that there is something here that is real. And I don't know if it's quantifiable, but I think it is. These home underdogs that are like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 range, not the 21, not the 24. Like those the home underdog stuff there, like that's too big of a spread. For whatever reason, I mean, and clearly there's a correlation to scoring first in a ball game and winning the ball game. It's a pretty decent correlation depending on the spread size. But in this range specifically, getting out to a fast start seems to really be one of the keys to winning the ball game. So if I'm Mike Norvell, and if this is a game I think I truly have a shot to win, and I don't know if Mike does or not. And of course, he would never say this publicly, but coaches aren't idiots. I talk to coaches all the time. They'll tell me, bro, we got no shot to win this. I'm like, okay, fair. Or like, no, actually, we think we got a real shot to win this. Cool. I don't think he would ever say it publicly, but if he truly believes in his heart of hearts that if FSU plays really well and Clemson has an off night, that they have a chance to win, and he should actually, because that's what the spread suggests, and that's what the athletes you have on this team, as poorly as they have played at times, that's what that still suggests. Then you need to empty the clip quickly in this game, I think, with some of the trick play stuff. Not trick play, excuse me, like some of the shot plays, some of your home run type shots. I think because I don't know that Brock Glenn can lead like multiple long drives. Possibly. There were actually opportunities against SMU that I was quite surprised by. Well, I wasn't surprised that FSU failed to take advantage of the opportunities. I was a little bit surprised that FSU had as many looks as they had. Like that offense was called a little bit better than I thought it was going to be called in that game. I think you need to unload the shot plays early to get a lead, allowing your defense to play with some confidence in its offensive counterpart. To me, matters a lot. I think that's a key for this football game. Getting a lead, whatever way you can, is key. If you get down early, like if it's 7-0, I really think there is an opportunity here for Clemson to blow FSU out in quite embarrassing fashion because I think there is a high quit factor for this football team right now. I think it's a fragile football team. I don't know why you wouldn't come out and give a good effort to start the game. I think whether that effort is maintained over the course of the game is largely dependent on how well FSU can move the football on offense. And I doubt that they can drive it consistently. But can they hit some explosive plays? Clemson has struggled this year at times with some explosive plays. A lot of that has been teams taking advantage of the linebackers and of the safeties, which has surprised me a little bit. Maybe you think some of the corners are gettable. I don't know that I truly do, but maybe you do. I don't know. They've been so in and out at corner. We'll have to see. I don't really know what FSU staff truly thinks about that. We also don't know like the health status of some of these offensive linemen. I would personally like to see some more Andre Otto in the game just to continue to get some of the young guys in who you can depend on. That to me would be an improvement, probably just to get them in the game. And I know this is a game like you want to do it against Clemson. Like, well, shit, you're throwing Brock Glenn in against Clemson. Well, I guess you have to because the finger injury to DJ. So I don't know. I don't really know what to expect out of the offense personally. Okay, finally, let's go ahead and have a score prediction for this football game. This is brought to you, of course, by Charlie Park and the For the Table Restaurant Group. Matt does an awesome job, man. Like, just it's a great company. Madso Township, and especially Charlie Park. If you want to do brunch, if you want to reserve it for like event space, if you want to do a celebratory, like maybe your kid is graduating at the mid year, maybe you just want to come up and surprise them for a nice event. If you want to just grab some great drinks after work or for an evening, good nightcap spot. Charlie Park rooftop is fantastic, and obviously these places are still awesome, even if the team is sucking. So I do think going to Tallahassee for these ball games is more than just the game. Like there's a certain portion of this audience that is only like just so diehard, like they're just football, 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 football. But there, there's also some who like the show, but who also just enjoy the Knolls and Tallahassee and like the other reasons why you go up there, like to see all your friends and to tailgate and to go to dinner together and to reconnect. And I think that's really important to do as well. And if you want to reconnect, those are some great spots to do it. I thought about this one for a while. I do think Florida State could come out and give a good effort on defense. I think there is some shot that they come out and can get some scores early on offense. But what are the real odds? The real odds that both of those things happen? I don't know. I'm not super convinced that they are all that high. Um, I will say a total of 46 in a Mike Norvell game is really low. And Mike Norvell games almost always play more to the over, especially in these big games, than you think. Although last year was weird because the defense was so damn good. So I shouldn't say almost always. Like that's not factual. They do have a tendency to go wildly high scoring. I don't think we get that here. I think it is more likely that we get a good first half effort out of the defense than it is that we get enough scores out of the offense to have the defense continue to play with really good discipline throughout the game. That's, I think, your worry, as I outlined in the first two segments of the show. So I'm going to go Clemson 34, FSU 17. I do think they keep it close for like the first 20, maybe 25 minutes of the ball game. And then that's where I think Clemson probably pulls away. I don't think that you can sustain enough drives against this Clemson defense. And I personally think the Clemson defense is like, at least the starting defense is a little bit better than what they have shown so far in recent games, because they've just been pulled so early and so many young guys have been mixed in because of the size of the blowout. So 34-17 is my pick. I actually kind of like first half under in this game. Personally, I think that's something that makes some sense here. And we'll see. Like we gave you the recipe for the upset. Scoring early, very strong defensive performance, allowing the defense to believe that the offense will do something, I think has a tangible benefit for this overall team. We will see you on the reaction show, and I got some exciting guests coming up. So appreciate you guys liking and subscribing to the channel and also sharing us on social media. We appreciate all the support. Next week, we have the mailbag episode coming up too. So should be a fun time, and go Noles. See y'all.